on in Kittitas County as Kittitas County response agencies, different partners around the community might address a specific issue in the community. We'll use a snowstorm kind of as a backdrop as we have this conversation. Again, my name is Rich Elliott. My background for the emergency management is through Kittitas Valley Fire and Rescue. And the presentation that we're going to use is actually based off of introductory ICS and NIMS material, NIMS being the National Incident Management System. And I've kind of consolidated that into a package that we can look at as elected officials and try to appreciate sort of what's going on behind the scenes. So if I make this work well, I thought there was a screen. There it goes. So the goal here is for everybody to kind of walk away with a basic understanding of the incident command system, which is sort of giving a framework for your local responders to manage and address community concerns as it relates to whether it be a wildfire, floods, a weather-related incident. We can also use the system to also plan for large incidents. And in the background, for most of the last 2 years, we've been using an ICS system to manage the COVID response in our community. So that's sort of an ongoing effort. And really take a look at this from the perspective of emergency management and elected officials. What is ICS? Incident Command System is the acronym. And that system actually comes out of Southern California from the late 1960s. They had wildfires that would traditionally burn twice a year, spring and fall. And those incidents were not really all that impactful until people began to put infrastructure, houses, and people sort of in areas that were traditionally prone to fire. And they found out that their organizational structure was inadequate. No food, things didn't match up, couldn't talk to each other, no plans. They had bad outcomes. So in Southern California, they developed a system called FireScope. FireScope eventually evolved into ICS. ICS has been labeled Incident Management System, or IMS. Those two are basically the same thing through the 1980s and 90s. And then September 11th, 2001 occurred, and the federal government took note that the ability of all of those agencies that needed to sort of respond to that national emergency were not as clean as it needed to be. And so they developed NIMS, which is the National Incident Management System, of which ICS is a foundational element. So this is how kind of we ended up where we ended up. It allows you common processes, a little bit of common language to manage resources. I was going to use the Taylor Bridge incident. We're going to use a snow incident just because it'll be in real time. So it is also based on the principle that we use whole community inclusion. So Kittitas County, roughly 50,000 full-time residents, large geographic area. It's diverse. We're subject to weather-related events, wildfires. We have a lot of people moving through the community. So there's an opportunity for large-scale events to happen. The reality is, though, as a largely rural community with a largely volunteer response force, at least in the fire EMS arena, not so much in law enforcement, and some of the other support agencies, public health, healthcare, those type of things. But we need the community to sort of participate. And it is also important to understand that even large communities like New York, which had never called mutual aid before September 11th, 2001, it was the first time in their history they had asked for help. Large communities can be overwhelmed by overwhelming incidents. So what we really want to do is we want to push this message down to individuals and families, members of our community, and say, you have a role in this. There's a role you can play formally, and there's a role you can play informally by just taking care of some simple things. That's emergency preparedness. People with access and functional needs. We need the business community. Statistics show that 50% of businesses that are disrupted for more than 2 weeks by a weather-related event or a large incident don't restart in the community that they're in, or don't look like they looked before. And those include sometimes large corporations. These can be sort of community changing events where it never comes back, Paradise being an example, at least to this point. Certainly using the faith-based community organizations, nonprofits, schools, media outlets. We obviously have CWU, school districts, a very strong hospital district. So we want everybody to be included. And because we're a small rural community that has a history of a lot of mostly wildfires, but floods, weather-related events, pandemics, large events, those type of things, we have learned, I think, fairly effectively to share our resources. So we're actually probably a half step ahead of a lot of communities in this respect. So one of the things that we do in ICS is we set priorities, and we set priorities with life safety. So people are going to matter the most. And I know some people might argue with that, but I actually break one down into 1A, B, C, and D. When I train responders, you take care of yourself first, because do not become part of the problem. You take care of your partner second, because they don't need to become part of the problem. Then we worry about the people who aren't directly affected by whatever's going on, because I don't need that to expand. Then we worry about the people who are having a bad day when we called 911. So we break that down, and it's a systematic system. Sometimes that's instantaneous. Sometimes that actually requires some thought, and we might not take certain actions. And that sometimes surprises the public. The next thing we do is we try to stabilize the incident. We try to keep it from growing. So if somebody's house is on fire, our first priority, other than life safety, is to make sure the neighbor's house doesn't catch on fire. Again, that sometimes surprises people, that I want to make sure I don't have two houses on fire. The last thing we worry about is property, environmental preservation in the business community. And those are all really important, and all this stuff gets woven together, but there are a list of priorities that we work on. So when we take a look at policymakers, elected officials play an important, but this is really important, a supportive role in prevention. So if I was to ask the question, there's one elected official in Kittitas County who has a direct role in emergency management. Who would that be?
Sheriff.
Sheriff. Statutorily, the sheriff in 39 counties of Washington State, assuming they haven't created its own emergency management agency, and in Kittitas County we haven't, the sheriff is the only person who has an operational role in, that is elected to their job, that has an operational role in emergency management. Everything else is supportive, and we'll talk about what that means. At the state, it's one person, it's the governor, controls the National Guard, controls the bureaucracy, and somewhat influences how we can get access to federal funding and state funding. At the national level, it's the president, controls the executive branch of the government. So there's lots of resources there. So those things are really important. But your job is to make sure that, you know, from a community perspective, that we're allocating staff and funding for programs that match the community's risk level and match the community's expectation. And if those things don't all align, we end up with problems. People's expectations aren't met. You can over prepare and waste community resources. You can prepare for the wrong things. Hopefully we're trying to match those things up as well as we can. We want people to, you know, again, policies, rules, ways we go about business in Kittitas County, you know, you guys influence those. We want you to communicate to the community what our expectations are for if you're a citizen in Kittitas County. We want you to provide strategic direction, you know, help line us up. During an emergency, we want you to be ready to declare an emergency. We want you to be able to communicate to the city manager, hey, here's the things we see that are important from our perspective, but also give the city manager and the department heads the ability to do their job, in your case, on the fire department, and so more city people. So where did this system come from? It came, these HSPD things just stand for Homeland Security Presidential Directive. And there was a bunch of them. Two of them established NIMS, which is that National Incident Management System. And the second one, another one established what's called the National Response Framework, which is how the federal government supports local communities during large incidents. If you break down NIMS, NIMS has all of those components in the middle of the page: preparedness, communication, information management, resource management, command and management. That's what we're going to focus on. And ongoing maintenance and management. It also includes a recovery component. You can see incident command system is a component of NIMS. So the difference between the two: command is I have explicit authority and I can control things. I can't change people's birthdays and those type of things. But inside an incident perimeter, I can control the environment, and it's my responsibility if I've been designated as the incident commander. That's command. Coordination, on the other hand, which occurs in EOCs or a thing called MACs, which is multi-agency coordination, is all you do is influence. You support the incident management teams that are out there doing the job. And you prioritize what's important. You can help allocate resources, but you don't tell the incident commanders or the incident manager or the incident response personnel what to do. Okay. Multi-agency coordination systems. So the nearest analogy I can give you is if you went up to Pangborn Field right now in Wenatchee, there's a dispatch center for DNR. It controls about 20 to 22% of the state geographically and a pretty large section of the wildfire risk in the state of Washington. During the summer, they're staffed up 24/7 with a high level of response. Right now, they have a couple people there. But that's basically a multi-agency coordination center. And if we have a fire in the Menashtash area on August 1st this year, where it's a rapidly progressing 50-acre fire, it gets away from us as a fire district, I call SWCC, Central Washington Interagency Command and Control, that's the dispatch center, and I say, I need these resources. They're not local resources, they're state resources. SWCC will look at the incident, prioritize it, they're looking at the map of everything else that's going on, all of the resources that are available, and they'll either say yes, or you get less than you asked for, or you'll get more than you asked for based on what they perceive your risk to be. And they provide that multi-agency coordination. Somebody's looking at the big picture and saying, get your fire out because this is going to be really big, or your fire is not as important as the one that's burning in Spokane Valley right now. So you're not getting anything because there's limited resources. So when we establish command and understand every time we respond to an incident, somebody's in charge, whether it be just a 2-person EMS response to help somebody who slipped on the ice. Okay. So over the last couple of weeks, say that we have had a significant amount of snowfall and the activity level in the community is picking up. Fire, EMS, law enforcement, we're getting structural collapses like Upper County's seeing right now. Lots of impacts, maybe food, all of those things are starting to occur. You're likely going to see the county open up an emergency operations center when they'll begin to staff that, where they're starting to look at these big picture items. And instead of each fire district or EMS agency, hospital, instead of everybody looking at their particular piece of the puzzle, you get a holistic look at what's going on in the county and where those friction points are. Where are the gaps? How can we best use our resources? And if we're going to go ask for help, you work through the county's EOC. We don't go to the state to ask for resources as a local jurisdiction. You work through the county EOC because that's how the system works. So we will have that EOC begin to form, which is going to provide support and prioritization for us as incident management teams. So there's 2 ways we can accomplish command. One person could be designated to do that from an agency that has a primary jurisdiction, or you can take, maybe it's 3 fire districts or Bureau of Indian Affairs or U.S. Forest Service if it's a fire or something like that. All of those entities could come together and you could say, hey, there's 2 or 3 primary agencies and we're going to put a representative from each because there's a stake. Those agencies have a primary stake. They'll get together and they'll form what's called unified command. So if you hear the term unified command, it just means more than one person's there, but they collectively make decisions. And in front of you guys, you have a grouping of incident action plans. So for some of them are for very, very large incidents. They're type 1 incidents, I'll explain what that means. And then there's mapping resources here. And so collectively, that incident management team, that combined incident management team,
That's rich.
will put together a
You want me to pass those out?
yeah, maybe. I got red carded apparently. All right. Red carded means I go home, right? But collectively, what we're going to do as an incident management organization is we're going to put together a plan. The plan's going to have objectives. It's going to tell us where we're going to use our resources. It's going to tell us how we're going to communicate. It's going to tell us what the backup plan is. It's going to tell us how do we handle an emergency within the emergency. That plan is generated in some cases every 12 hours, in some cases every 24 hours. I will tell you for the COVID, we were generating multiple plans a week. Then we got a cadence down. We went weekly. Now we're doing once a month. We update the plan because there's not a lot changing every day. So whether that's unified command or a single incident commander, somebody signs off on this plan, and that is the plan. The Forest Service doesn't act independently of DNR, which doesn't act independently for the fire districts. The city of Ellensburg is obviously going to be doing public works, snow removal, support, but all of those things are lined up so that the school districts are getting supported, that the hospital districts are getting supported, so that everybody's sort of working towards the same end, which are the incident objectives. The second item on here is this concept of unity and chain of command. And I underlined it and kind of bolded it a little bit for a reason, because I know I've served in and out of some elected positions in my life. We have egos and we want to contribute and we want to say, hey, it could be done differently. But the reality is that we hire people or we designate people to take care of this for us. They're professionals. They know what they're doing. Give them the tools to let them do their job. And then they're going to operate inside a chain of command. The one principle that exists in ICS, which doesn't exist in most civilian applications, doesn't exist necessarily in our personal life, is you have one boss and one boss only. You only can report to one person in ICS. The incident commander cannot talk to somebody who's 3 or 4 levels deeper in the incident and give them any level of direction. They have to go through the chain of command. And that unity of command, one boss only, is a super important concept. So we don't need to worry about that. I talked about area command when we were talking just before this class started. Apparently there's a structure fire. Okay. So when we talk about area command, this is that concept that if things got so busy in our state, like with COVID, at least initially in the process, where they were overwhelming requests for assistance, National Guard resources, we were short on personal protective equipment, we didn't know how to do isolation and quarantine, masking regulations, and then eventually the vaccine rollout. What ended up happening is the state put an area command over the top of the state and said, we're going to manage everything public health from this area command. And area command is the only entity that can tell incident commanders what to do directly. And it's very rarely used. There's a handful of area commanders in 6, 7, 8 states in the Pacific Northwest. So it's very rarely used, but it's the only way that you can give direct direction to an incident commander. So we can use this system at incidents or events. Okay, planned events. Okay, we talked about this already. And so what I really want to talk about is at a low level, this might be what an ICS chart looks like. And you're sort of putting the system together. Every incident we go to, we designate an incident commander. Somebody's responsible for safety and somebody's responsible to fix the problem. Otherwise, there wouldn't be an incident. Those 3 things happen at every incident. We don't need to worry about how to pay for it. We don't need to worry about what the plan is because it's going to get resolved in 10 minutes. As those functions become necessary or the timeline extends or the amount of resources we bring in, we put a structure in place in front of those resources. This, by the way, ICS is largely based off some lessons learned from the military about logistics and planning. That might be what about 1/3 of the EOC at Camp Murray looks like. So EOCs can be really sophisticated. Incident command posts can literally be on the front of the hood of a truck. Okay, it can be really small, it can be really simple. It's as complex as it needs to be. So this is a diagram of what a normal incident command structure would look like with the primary positions filled. So incidents escalate in ascending order in terms of their complexity. So you guys got a 1-page form that had complexity on one side and had this chart on the other side. Complexity, a type 5 incident is you dispatch it, you go take care of it. Type 4 incident, you get some help. Type 3 incident, you are bringing in regional resources and probably relying on an outside team. So it's escalating really quick. A type 3 incident normally runs about 100 to 400 responders. Type 2 incidents, you're ending up close to 1,000 people are managing the incident. The fire that was burning down on 410 and in the Natchez area over the summer, Schneider Springs, escalated from a type 3 and then bounced between a type 1 and a type 2 incident, depending on what was going on with the weather in terms of its size and its impact. A type 1 incident's pretty much the biggest incident. You can have 4,000 or 5,000 responders up there. You go any bigger than that, you're going to probably go to area command at that point. So this is what the structure looks like. You always fill the incident commander spot. Their job is they're responsible for everything below them, unless they designate and assign responsibility and authority out for any of the other functional areas below them. Below them, you'll see 3 positions. Those are command staff. You don't need to know that. But command staff includes the public information officer. Public information officers, as I stated earlier today, are worth their weight in gold. So communicating to the public about what the expectation might be for snow removal, or not having everybody upset because their garbage didn't get picked up, or hey, maybe you want to go scrape the snow off your roof before it takes your electricity down. Public information officers can avoid a lot of downstream trouble with the public in terms of missed expectations, but also in real time, if you're putting information out, particularly nowadays with social media, if you're putting out correct information about what evacuation routes would be, or during Taylor Bridge, there was a push on social media to tell people Ellensburg's going to burn up, you need to leave. Well, that just complicates things. That was never possible, or in any way probable, I guess. So we want to get a public information messaging out really quickly, because if the public knows that there's a way to get accurate information in a timely manner, they won't pay attention to the people who are making stuff up. And people will make stuff up if you let them. The next position is safety officer. By the way, you'll notice they all got the same title because they're all command staff. They work, you do administrative work directly for the incident commander. Safety officer we put in place, that's somebody who can move around the incident and look at risk benefit. So a safety officer can overrule the incident commander if they find something unsafe. So that's what the safety officer's job is they go out and they do risk benefit. They put plans together that sort of address the risks associated with whatever we're doing out in the community. The liaison officer coordinates between agencies that aren't primarily inside the incident command structure. And so what I mean by that is, just making sure they didn't repage this thing. The liaison officer is going to, so if Burlington Northern rolls a train somewhere in Kittitas County, they have an incredible amount of resources and knowledge on how to address a train derailment and all of the things that are on the train, and they can bring to bear a ton of resources that we couldn't even hope to find. But is Burlington Northern a public entity with overall responsibility for public safety, or are they a private corporation? They're a private corporation responsible primarily to their shareholders, whoever owns them. And so sometimes their priorities wouldn't necessarily align with the incident commander or the community in terms of how to get it cleaned up and reduce the risk level. A lot of times they will. But I'll put a liaison officer in place to go talk to Burlington Northern so that we can coordinate their resources, because I'm not going to let them help me make decisions about what's important and how to get it done, but I am going to have them help me with resources. So we've gone from command staff to another term. You don't need to remember this, but general staff. And so the incident commander can designate people in these 5 sections. It used to be 4 if you took a class more than a year or 2 ago. The intel section got added. But operations is where most of the people are going to go. So this is where people are going to be sandbagging. This is where we might have people out, snow shoveling, taking snow off of roofs, getting at people who have restricted access if there's a large snow event. So operations is where most of the resources are going to go, and we're going to talk about this concept of span of control here shortly. So operations takes whatever the objectives are, and you guys have objectives in each of your incident action plans. They're somewhat similar, but different. By the way, if there's any notes in there that are inappropriate, it's because those are my actual plans, and sometimes I wasn't happy with the directions I was getting, so disregard those. I think I cleaned most of those out, but I took notes in real time. Now Terry's looking for them. There's no pictures, Terry. So operations takes whatever the incident commander wants to get done, buys off on the objectives and says, yes, those are reasonable with the resources and the time you've given me. And for that operational period, we're going to try to accomplish what you've set out. So the operations section chief is designated by the incident commander to manage operations, and then the incident commander stays out of it, other than working with the operations section chief. So in the operations section, you can clearly see that we could overwhelm a single supervisor if we didn't create a structure. And so there's a whole bunch of different levels that you can create in operations. And basically the span of control concept operates on a range of 3 to 7. If you're managing less than 3 things, you might be an unnecessary supervisor, and the world's full of those. If you're managing more than 7 things, you might want to think about getting some help. You can take those guidelines and go outside those guidelines with good reason. So when I take technical rescue and I'm going to put 2 people off a wind turbine to rescue somebody or something like that, I'm probably going to have 1 person up there checking the knots. So that's a 1-to-2 ratio. So I'd go below the span of control. We use correctional inmate crews for suppression. We put them in low risk areas. But literally, these are people who have, in some cases, have made horrible choices and will never get out of prison. But they're trustees. We bring them out to fires. They wear different shirts. They wear red shirts, by the way. So those are the prisoners, or they're Canadian, because the Canadian fire crews wear red too. But when they come to fires, but there are 10 inmates walking around with chainsaws, axes, and shovels in remote locations with their supervisor. So we're 10 to 1. We don't have problems with them because they're highly motivated to do their job well, because they don't get to go out and go camping, do important things, in some cases get paid and get a job later when they get out of prison. So you can mess with that span of control, but we use groups and branches and task forces and strike teams to basically go 7 times 7 times 7, and you get big numbers really quickly. That's how you can have a couple thousand people operating in an operations section with 1 operations section chief, because they're not directly reporting to 1 person. Logistics gets you stuff and services. So it takes a lot of stuff to keep things moving. Again, military principles, fuel, food, all that stuff, all the things you need to make whatever it is you want to get done, it has to be there and it has to be available. So you'll see in Kittitas County, you'll see fire camps popping up in the summer, oftentimes. Schools, fairgrounds, those type of things. They'll negotiate, they'll take over the facility, they'll bring in food vendors, sanitation, all sorts of things, sleeping areas, get the sprinklers turned off so everybody's tent doesn't get wet. All that stuff's happening under the logistics section. They're getting you all those stuff and services. And oftentimes this is what the logistics section looks like. A type 3 team generally comes in anywhere between 18 to 22 people. A type 2 team is going to come with close to 50. And a type 1 team is going to be closer to 100 people are coming. You're going to spend more than $100,000 a day if you get a type 1 team, exclusive of the resources you're going to use. That's what the team costs. Type 3 teams are a lot less expensive. I like type 3 teams, and that's what I'm part of. So they may have a comm unit that's going to bring in data, satellite internet, radios, clonable radios, everything you need to communicate on the incident. A medical unit, they'll place ambulances around the incident. So we may pre-position ambulances around the incident. For a snow incident, maybe that doesn't make as much sense because you'll probably leave them where they're at. But on a fire, sometimes it took me 3.5 hours to drive around the Okanagan Complex fire when I worked that incident in 2015. That's how big the fire was, 250,000 acres. So we'll pre-position medic units and we'll have a plan how to get the people airlifted, out if they get a traumatic injury. Food unit, that makes complete sense. Facilities, they're going to line up the fire camps, those type of things. Transportation unit, sometimes the camp is physically an hour away from the incident. So the roads are so bad that you'll bus people back and forth between the incident. They'll work their 14, 16-hour shift and then they get bused back to camp, rather than having 70 vehicles driving back and forth on the roads because they turn to moon dust. And then tech support. Okay, Intel is a new section. It isn't used very often, but this is where we add in that component of sometimes people do bad things. Oklahoma City bombing it's in most of our lifetime. But there were reasons that they were holding on to information that they wouldn't necessarily share with everybody else, that they wouldn't have held on, whether this was international domestic terrorism, and they wanted to kind of catch people when they thought they'd gotten away with it rather than have them kind of go into the woodwork. So the intel section is gathering information. It's very rarely used and deciding how to disseminate that information. The planning section is super important. That's who puts this plan together. They take all of the resources, they track where they are, try to get them in the right divisions, get all the contact information, get all that stuff together. They put together this plan every day, and they get the incident commander to sign off on the plan. And that's what the planning section is doing. So they're going to have technical specialists. So if we're really worried about what's going to happen with weather or flooding, we're going to probably potentially bring in a meteorologist if it's a fire meteorologist, or fire behavior analysis for wildland fire, but for a dam breach or a large snow event where we're worried, okay, is this all we're going to see, or are we going to get more? Then we would want somebody who has really good weather information to give us that information very specific to our location. Documentation unit, they're collecting all the records for the incident. They're putting them on thumb drives, and it used to be they literally had boxes of information. And then the situation, they're going to forecast what's going to happen. Hazmat, wildland incidents, weather-related incidents. You want to know what's coming so that you can build a plan that's going to meet what's going to be in place tomorrow, not what's happening today. So that's super important. Finance and admin, again, this is where we get into governments get into trouble, because I can tell you, even on a type 3 incident, Iron East, we had two lightning fires in 2018 at Blewett Pass. One was right below the pass on the old Blewett Highway Pass, and one was over on Iron East Creek. And we managed those incidents. It was in September of 2018. Our camp was here at the fairgrounds. And as we were managing this incident, we used a lot of aircraft one day. These are 200-acre fire, total, cumulative. I spent close to $500,000 in one day on aircraft, just trying to keep the fire boxed in so that it didn't blow through the pass and get into the beetle kill trees and run towards Wenatchee. So there's a lot of money being spent. Type 1 teams, it's not uncommon for them to spend more than $10 million in a day. The stuff costs a lot of money. There's been a lot of conversations about National Guard. I know Rosalind was talking about activating National Guard to get them to help dig out for the snow. Okay, understand that National Guard comes with a bill. There's been a lot of conversation. If the state doesn't agree to spend for it, the city of Rosalind is going to pay for it if they ask for those resources, and they're expensive. The other piece to this is when we take a look at mobilization, the states are going to agree to pay for things if they agree to pay for things, but they're not. It's not an unlimited check. They're going to have a conversation with you about what they're willing to pay for and what portion of the incident they're willing to pay for. So local entities need to be really careful about. In your finance admin section, which is finance admin section chief, they're going to do contracts. So are we going to contract for additional snow removal? And what are we willing to pay for that? And it has to meet, some reasonable guidelines for government spending. But that you guys declare an emergency, that's effectively what you release local government to do, is you allow them to purchase services and goods in a less cumbersome way than they normally would, but there are still rules associated with it. So they're signing contracts. They're getting you your stuff that logistics is ordering. They're paying for it. Timekeeping unit, the most expensive thing in an incident is people. Make a lot of money because most people are working overtime by their second or third day, because you're working 14, 16-hour shifts. So second or third day, you've broken the 40-hour threshold. And for the balance of the week, it's not uncommon to work 100 hours in a week on an incident. Claims unit. So if we go and we break something on an incident, so during Taylor Bridge, about the 18th hour, I found myself out near Pheasant Lane, Upper Green Canyon Road, that area, and the fire was pushing towards Sun East, and we thought we were going to lose it up into Chelan County, and it was going to run all the way to Yakima River, because the Columbia River. So nothing we were doing was working. So we wanted to kind of catch the fire there. I went out there, saw the division was in trouble. We kept trying to chase the fire across this field, and I drove ahead of the fire by about a mile. I had a big bulldozer with me that had about 3 hours left for that day, because they can only work 16 hours in a day. And I told them dismount the dozer, and I told them to drive up Pheasant Lane and take out a half-mile of fence, because I needed something to burn off of. I needed the driveway plus a dozer width. And he goes, really? And I go, yes, take the fence out. So he starts taking his bulldozer, grinding up fence, and we burned off that, and it stopped the fire. But we also bought the person another half-mile of fence. So, but it stopped the fire. So it had the outcome, but that's what the claims unit's going to be doing. So when we set objectives for an incident, we use that acronym, SMART acronym, but basically we want them to be attainable objectives. We want to make sure we're telling people what to do, because when we manage incidents, we manage them by objectives. I shouldn't have to tell somebody how to do their job. And if I do, I pick the wrong person, and I'm not doing my job as the supervisor, if that's my job. So we manage by objectives, tell them what the outcome is, tell them what the timeline is, give them the resources. If they buy off on it, let them do their job until proven otherwise. It's going to work, because they'll communicate to you if it's not working. This planning P that I put on here is the process that we go through at an incident. And kind of the leg of the P, it starts at the bottom. We have something happen in our community. So large snow event. We realize this is going to be a large snow event. Obviously, it unfolds a little bit slower than most fires and things like that, but we get notification and we begin to mobilize our resources. We bring those resources together and we give them an incident action plan. We brief them. Here's what we want you to do. Here's what we don't want you to do. Once we exit the leg of the P there will be an operational period designated. In most incidents, it's going to be a 12 or a 24 hour, 24 being the predominant operational period. And we're going to go through this O where that we go cycle, where we're going to be meeting with the command and general staff, because if I'm going to order resources from across the state or even nationally, sometimes internationally, when I order those resources, they don't show up an hour later. It takes them 4, 6, 8 hours to fly that DC-10 up with, for retardant drops. If it wasn't located at Moses Lake, it's probably coming out of Nevada. So I got a few hours to order it ahead. If I want hand crews here tomorrow, like hotshot crews for fires, those are national resources. And I have to get the order approved and then they have to travel here, sometimes from out of state. So this process goes through a 12 and a 24-hour cycle where we're inputting information, giving it to logistics, planning, finance. They're putting the plan together, and then the next morning the resources are there. Or they tell us they weren't going to get them the night before, and we adjust the plan. So this is happening cyclic. And the reason I'm making a big deal about this for elected officials is these documents are for you too. You can take a look at these. Okay. The incident management team will build in an opportunity for stakeholder or agency representatives to come in and have a conversation with them about, get updated in real time about what's going on the incident. And maybe you give some input as to what the priorities might be in the community, whether it's air quality related to a fire or, those type of things. So there's an opportunity in this cycle for you guys to meet with the incident management team and have a conversation, but it's not at 0600 when we're briefing the resources, which is typically when we're kicking them out the door. I start my day as an operations section chief, usually about 4:30. I get up, make sure all my resources showed up, and then I meet with my people about 5 in the morning. We trade resources, we solidify the plan, we make notes on the plans, which is what you'll see, and then we kick them out the door after the 6 a.m. briefing. They go out and do whatever it is they're going to do. Our goal is to have everybody operating off a common picture, situational awareness. We want people to understand what's going on, why they're doing what they're doing, what the intended outcome is. That doesn't mean they need to know what's going on 40 miles away, in a completely different application. It means I want them to understand what's around them and maybe what's adjacent to them. Okay, so that constant sharing of information is important. So Joint Information Center. This is something that can be established when we have large regional incidents. So go back to 2005 Hurricane Katrina. They had an early season hurricane enter the Gulf of Mexico. Katrina was the designation. It grew from a 3 to a 4, and I think it was a 5 briefly. I think when it actually hit land, it was close to downgrading to a 4. Big storm, lots of energy. Hits New Orleans, Alabama, Mississippi, and then goes up and hits Tennessee, Kentucky, some other states. Georgia got hit a little bit. Caused a lot of damage, obviously. And the federal government probably underreacted for a short period of time and then began to catch up. And in the process of managing all of these states that are affected different times and different problems, New Orleans being below sea level kind of had its own set of issues and a bunch of snakes that are kind of angry. And so all this stuff was happening. In the meantime, about a week later, Hurricane Rita entered the Gulf of Mexico, and it tracked exactly the same track, 3, 4, as it approached the Louisiana coast. They formed a Joint Information Center in their response to Hurricane Katrina and basically said, we got to get messaging out because this is going to be worse than Katrina. But the messaging that goes to New Orleans with a completely destroyed communications infrastructure needs to be different than the message we're given to Nashville, because it's going to hit at different times and have different impacts. And so at the Joint Information Centers where they're coordinating all this information. By the way, the hurricane weakened and went to Houston, which is where they sent a lot of the people out of New Orleans. So those people should have bought lottery tickets. There's also a thing called the Joint Information System. And these are the rules that people agree to on how we're going to disseminate information. And so here's where you may feel as an elected official that somebody sort of took your Second Amendment rights away. there are things that are occurring in real time in an incident that they don't necessarily want shared in, sort of broadcast message or in a non-controlled message. Because if we make the decision that we're going to have to evacuate certain communities, we may want to do it in a sequential order rather than pull the people out on the far end of the incident and kind of gum the system up while you're waiting for the people at the highest risk. So you may be told by the incident management team, we will give you this information. This is not for dissemination. And this makes elected officials sometimes feel uncomfortable. If you feel uncomfortable, don't access the information, because there's a reason they don't want you to do this. And the joint information system will form and basically say, here are the rules we're going to use for disseminating information. Command is transferred when we have to transfer command. So if we have an incident inside City of Ellensburg, inside Kittitas County, and we don't feel like we have the resources to effectively manage that incident, we can transfer command to a higher level. We can bring an incident management team from the outside. But what's going to happen is everybody that's going to sort of cede control of that particular incident or that particular area of geography is going to sign what's called a delegation of authority. And it's a contract between the incident management team and anybody who's a stakeholder. And so as the mayor, you are probably going to be signatory to a delegation of authority, and you're going to agree to a set of terms where this is what you're allowing the team to do. This is the return, this is how we want the incident returned to us. And the incident commander is also negotiating those terms, because if you ask them to do things that aren't possible with the resources they have, they're going to cross that one off and say, we're not agreeing to that one. So that happens during a transfer of command. We will transfer command occasionally during an incident if the incident escalates. We had a fatality fire in 2012, a family, three people, 2 kids and a mom died. When I arrived at that incident, I had an incident commander there, but he was also a paramedic. He was running the incident perfectly appropriately. And I normally will not take over an incident if somebody's doing their job. I just let them do their job, and I do find something, they'll give me something else to do. But in this particular case, we had 2 viable victims come out of that house that we thought were potentially going to be saved. And so in the process, I counted paramedics that were actually outside the fire, and he was one of 2. And I said, I take command if you get a second viable victim. If we pull somebody out and it looks like we can work them, and we had to. So we will transfer command in that case. We talked about severity of incidents up to type 1, type 1 being big. We've had Table Mountain and Schneider Springs touched Kittitas County would be the 2 most recent type 1 incidents. We've had a lot of type 2s. Clockham Tarps went type 2 for a while. Taylor Bridge went type 2. Those are probably the ones. And then a lot of them have been managed at the type 3 level, dozens in the last 10 years. When we type resources, we type them by what they are, and then we type them by their capability. So when I ask for like a type 1 helicopter for wildland firefighting, I'm getting a Sikorsky Sky Crane, or I'm getting a Chinook, or I'm getting a Blackhawk. Really, really high-end performing helicopters that can do a lot, versus DNR's helicopters, which are type 2 helicopters, significantly less capability. So I'll just kind of walk through this, and I'll walk through this in the thing, and we're just about done here. When we're talking about an incident occurs, we decide what resources do we need. We order those resources, whether it be through the state or whether they be through local agencies, through mutual aid agreements, those type of things. We mobilize, the dispatch center tracks us. We arrive at the incident at the bottom of that cycle there, and we address the problem. In the interim time, as we're addressing the problem, we eventually come up with what's called the demobilization plan, where we're going to send the resources back in an order that makes sense. Not necessarily the cheapest, not necessarily, it's going to follow a whole bunch of what are the needs of incidents and communities around us, who traveled the furthest, those type of things. We add all of those things up, we put a demo plan, we put them back into the system, they get reimbursed, and they go back into the resource, or in the resource pool. So our system, our strength, you have an incredibly capable, readily deployable workforce in this community, and our agencies share. We are scalable. People here understand. We build the system hopefully in front of the incident so we catch up to the incident. What is missing is we don't have any depth. What is also missing is at a national level, the ability to call and ask for incident management teams and resources is diminishing. Type 3, 2, and 1 incident management teams are oftentimes, they'll get what's called UTF, It's not a bad word. It's unable to fill. Okay. And when we get UTF resources, you're basically stuck. I think it is very likely in the next 10 years, we will ask for incident management resources and be told no. We're attempting at the county level to build the capability for a type 3 team so we can manage our own incidents if we have to. It's not ideal, but it's what we need. So what you guys can do as elected officials is support local government to allow people inside those agencies to develop those skill sets and those qualifications so that when that need arises, we can pull people, and we need to be able to pull them from disparate agencies. They can't be from the fire department and the police department. During Taylor Bridge, all the fire personnel and most of the law enforcement personnel were pretty freaking busy doing stuff. So we have to be able to fill that from the hospital district, from the city, from CWU, from the school districts, public works, pull those people in and be able to manage those positions. Because you don't need to be an expert in wildland fire to do logistics, planning, finance, liaison, or public information officer. The rest of the positions you do, but most of the positions you don't. And we need that capability. So that's what I would ask of you guys as elected officials, is to think about that and provide that flexibility for the people who are running your organizations. And with that, I'm actually, I'm a minute late. I'm done. You guys have questions? No more red cards?
Yeah, there's,
He's holding the one finger up and it's a thumb. That's good.
so Rich, we have questions up here.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, so a couple. One would be, I mean, you kind of touched on the snow event that we've just had, and then you kind of alluded to the fact that there could be an incident command formed. Part of the conversation that, you know, I know that Roslyn and the city of Clallam declared states of emergency. The county is not.
Yes.
Leavenworth declared a state of emergency and then called in the National Guard, and I think they're on the hook for it.
Yes.
Because the county had not.
Yes.
So help us understand, you know, we're now a week out, let's just say, from the event,
Yes.
but you could still form an incident command, and what would be the advantages of that, and how would that occur?
I wouldn't form an incident command structure unless there is an operational need to manage the resources that are out doing the work. So if in the normal course of business and the normal structure that we have in the city, you know, through the normal hierarchy, things are working and we're accomplishing what we need to in the priority orders, there is no advantage to implementing an IMT. It's just extra cost and an extra layer. The declaration of emergency is somewhat of a financial decision, and it allows for some flexibility and potentially can help you access state and federal funding, but we want to be very deliberate in how we make those decisions.
We've done, I remember we've done state of emergencies for flooding, you know, because I mean, basically it positions the community
Yes.
and the city to access FEMA and whatever resources are. And I mean, I think in a certain way that occurred during the pandemic, right? I mean,
Yes.
that because there was a declaration of emergency at all those levels,
Yes.
there were funds that Department of Health, the Public Health Department accessed.
And the incident management team that formed for COVID was a local team to basically make the best use of the resources that we could either get locally or we could get from the state, and try to just optimize that process instead of everybody sort of going through their own things.
So wait, one more quick
bad.
question. I know, and one of the requests that we dealt with in COG, I think, was an increase. I can't remember what the percentage increase was for EMS through Cheryl and
EMS office, yeah.
yeah, and that's been increasing. To your point about the resources and the depth, is that a function of Central has folks that they can allocate to participate, to be ready to, or do we need to look at, I mean, we will be going as a city into a biennial budgeting process here soon, right? So as a community, do we need to look at an enhanced emergency response pool of dollars to build resource capacity to be handed off at the point at which an incident occurs? Does that make sense?
I would say a qualified yes. At the city level, I think us building capabilities to participate in a regional or a county team is probably where we could invest some time that would, or some time and money that would pay off in the long run. I think if we were talking as a county about where we could potentially invest some resources that would holistically help, emergency management is we have somebody who works that job part-time right now in the county, and that's not all they do. And so that is sometimes, and he does a great job at it, but it is probably something that is, if we paid more attention to it, we could probably be further ahead and save money and potentially access.
And my resource question is, I mean, the city doesn't have depth either.
What's that?
Right? The city doesn't have depth either.
No.
So if a community is looking to actively participate in an incident command structure, by doing so, we're then stretching our own resources internally, I would think, because it means somebody that has been doing what could or could not be a critical task has to be pushed into incident command, right?
I think it's looking at that from a different perspective and realizing that there are sometimes people like Public Works is going to probably be in really high demand when we talk about like a lot of weather related incidents. So designating all of those people to play roles in an incident management structure is probably not where you're going to get your return, but there may be people in the organization who do things that are different that wouldn't normally participate in emergency management activities who could be developed to have those skill sets. And I will tell you that the type of training that this employs and participating in this, you know, at the level I do, I come back way better at my job because I get to go out into other communities and make mistakes at their cost. And then I get to come back and I won't make them here. No offense to all the communities that I went to.
There is a question from Corey. Commissioner Wright is watching online. I think he had his hand raised for a question.
Okay, so we'll go to the virtual.
Do you have control of that, or who has?
I don't have control over that.
I'm on, if you can hear me.
Yeah, Corey, sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Just for the record, even as a Republican, I've never asked for my Second Amendment rights during an incident, Rich. So just throwing that out. So couple questions. First off, I'm under the understanding that snow removal is not an allowed expense under FEMA regular laws, simply because under the federal law, the folks in Florida don't want to pay for annual snow removal in Buffalo. Is that accurate?
I don't actually know the question. I know that a lot of those types of activities aren't covered the same way other types of weather events are, like wildfires, tornadoes, hurricanes, and things like that. And some of that's recognition by FEMA. And FEMA was a very hurricane, earthquake-based agency, and we're finally getting them to sort of appreciate that wildfires are sort of fall into the same category, especially scale and complexity.
Okay.
But I don't know the answer to the snow removal. We just used it as an example because this is something going on in the community. And so, yeah, in terms of reimbursement from either the federal government or accessing funds through the state, I think you're right that it is less obvious and less clearly reimbursable.
Okay. And then my second question just reflects back on your comment about the emergency management department potential. I recall doing the tabletop drill at the station there with the folks who did from Snohomish, who did the OSO slide. What does a countywide emergency department look like in Washington? Is that a unified sort of jurisdictional piece between the municipalities and the city or county, or is that a county only? What's a normal example of that look like?
Well, like, so King County, King County is not a good example because some of the cities have their own entities. Smaller counties that have formed their own emergency management agency, use Benton County. That is a countywide entity that everybody contributes to. And I'm not advocating that we necessarily take that step and take it out of the sheriff's office. My response was to Councilmember Tab that if we wanted to invest in something, you know, we have one person wearing a lot of hats trying to do that job. And sometimes that's a little overwhelming, and it is not the fault of the county or that individual. It's just, there's a lot of stuff going on in emergency management, and doing it well pays off. Doing it poorly cost something.
Yeah. Okay. I appreciate it. Thanks, Rich.
Thank you. I think we, unless Heidi, did you have something you were leaning forward, like you wanted to
Oh.
comment?
Nope, I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's take a 5-minute break and
Thanks, Rich.
our regular meeting.